A weirdly common problem in Final Fantasy XIV, possibly especially because of the age of the game combined with the amount of changes the game has got over the years, is that some players will claim that something is true without ever checking if it actually is. Either because they assumed it is the way they think, or because it was like that at some point. Welcome to Final Fantasy XIV Mythbusters, where I and my friends highlight the odd claims and misconceptions players make, and test them to see whether they are true or not, while also explaining how you can test it yourself so you can learn how to science stuff in Final Fantasy XIV. Number 1. Kardia's healing benefits from damage buffs. False. This is a weirdly common claim and often stems from one key misunderstanding. Kardia's healing is unrelated to the damage of the attack. The way Kardia works is that when you cast a damaging spell, it triggers a separate, unrelated heal of 170 cure potency. This is just the same as, for example, when a warrior uses Storm's Path in combo and it does 440 potency of damage and 250 cure potency. Doing 10% more damage from Surging Tempest does not actually increase the healing done by Storm's Path, which, when you really think about it, makes pretty good sense, right? One wrinkle to this subject that is worth considering is that if the attack that triggers something like a separate unrelated heal has some sort of secondary property inherently in it that could affect the heal, then it would also extend to the heal. What in the world does that mean? When a warrior uses Bloodwetting or Nascent Flash, they add a similar effect to Kardia to all damaging weapon skills. Each heal, just like with Kardia, can critically hit separately from the damage of the attack. However, if the heal is triggered by an attack that inherently always critically hits, meaning Inner Chaos, Chaotic Cyclone or Primal Rend, then the attached healing effect of Bloodwetting or Nascent Flash will also always critically hit. Interestingly, this extends further for Nascent Flash because the healing your party member receives is a copy of the exact amount you healed. If the heal was a critical hit on you, whatever amount you heal as a result will also be applied to the Nascent Flash target. In other words, if Sage had an attack that was guaranteed to be a critical hit, it is all but certain that Kardia would, as a result, be a guaranteed critical hit as well when activated by this attack. Which also leads us to the potential final point as to how this kind of claim comes about. A bit of an intentionally misleading argument is specifically to attach it to Dancer's closed position. The obvious conclusion from there is that the argument is that Standard Finish boosts the healing from Kardia. It does not, it only increases damage done. But what the arguer actually meant, and either forgot or decided not to mention, is that Devilment would increase the average healing done by Kardia, because Kardia's healing can crit, which means gaining 20% more critical hit chance would on average increase the healing done by Kardia, which would mean the arguer is more focused on being right. Dancer can boost the healing of Kardia through closed position than anything else. Just to summarize for anyone a bit confused by this back and forth, Kardia is not affected by damage bonuses because it has nothing to do with damage besides being activated by an attack. If the attack that activated Kardia hypothetically inherently always crits, like how Warrior's Primal Rend does, but Fellcleave does not, even with Inner Release, then Kardia would also automatically crit. Finally, effects that increase your chance to critically hit obviously also increases your chance to critically hit with healing just as well as it does damage, meaning a buff like Battle Litany or Devilment would increase the average power of Kardia. Number 2. Swiftcast is always a DPS gain. Always? False. Sometimes true. This one particularly originates from something that actually used to be true for summoners specifically. However, a lot of players don't actually quite realize that Swiftcast is often not actually a damage gain, and context is important. Let's start with the fact that it used to be true for summoners. At the launch of Endwalker, the GZD of Ruby-Rite was 2.5 seconds, as opposed to the 3 seconds it is now. The cast time was 2.8 seconds, just as it is now. This means that if you used Swiftcast on Ruby-Rite, you skipped the cast time, which was specifically longer than the GZD, making it a DPS gain. In the exact same way that Black Mage Swiftcasting Fire 4, which has a 2.8 second cast time and 2.5 second GZD, would be a damage gain. However, with the change that Ruby-Rite now has a 3 second GZD and a 2.8 second cast time, means that Swiftcasting it simply skips the cast time so you can run around for 3 seconds. But you don't gain any damage outright. The same applies to Garuda's Slipstream, which has a 3 second cast time and a 3.5 second GZD. However, you may recall that most optimized summoner openers and 2-minute bursts Swiftcast Slipstream anyway. This is because your damage buffs are snapshotted when the cast finishes, which means that if you have any damage buffs with less than 3 seconds left on them when you start casting Slipstream, it would have been an indirect damage gain to Swiftcast Slipstream because skipping the cast time would mean the buffs would still be active when Slipstream is cast, where if you had actually cast Slipstream normally, you would not have benefited from these buffs. In a similar fashion, Red Mage can gain DPS by using Swiftcast to use an additional long cast spell like the Thunder. However, Red Mage generally has a lot of play with spell timings in relation to casting Flesh and Contra Sixt exactly on cooldown, so this is not too surprising. Black Mage can also gain damage by skipping the cast time on the spells they have with more cast time than 2.5 seconds, which is a rather extensive list. However, there are exceptions. Due to the animation lock inherent in using any action, Swiftcasting while your GZD is already available will delay your next spell by around half a second at least. Which means, for example, that a Black Mage casting Fire 4 normally, then Swiftcasting and then using Fire 4 will take around half a second longer to do this than if they had just cast it normally twice. This is of course irrelevant if you're being targeted by a mechanic so you have to move, but the important aspect is in that exception, that you didn't have the option to cast Fire 4 twice normally since you had to move. This logic also applies for Red Mage. Usually, you have plenty of time to choose to weave Swiftcast before your next cast, but if you decide to Swiftcast when your GZD is already available, then delaying your cast by half a second would actually make the Thunder or the Arrow worse than you have just jolted normally into another spell. As Swiftcasting in this moment would delay your GZD by half a second, meaning that you spent 3 seconds on casting the Thunder or Arrow, where you could have spent 2.5 seconds, including the GZD, on casting Jolt instead. This is significant because Jolt, just on its own, is closer to 16% weaker than the Thunder, and not 20%. So this delay isn't worth it. But again, if you suddenly realize mid-cast that you don't actually have time to finish that Jolt, this is still better than doing nothing, right? I hope this discussion is somewhat helpful for those that need to hear it. The important part is that Swiftcast is the kind of ability where you really have to plan it out to make it a damage gain to use, which means it can be perfectly natural to have it available and ready for minutes at a time, even if it could be considered a waste. Number 3. Blue Mage avails someone, redirecting damage to them, but then a Paladin uses cover on the Blue Mage. Where does the damage go when you hit the Blue Mage? Continuing the tradition of cover never being fully explored, we have another test. For this test, you will of course need a Blue Mage with Avail, a Paladin, and some third friend, or victim, depending on what happens, I guess. Have the Blue Mage fight something, and then have the Blue Mage avail the third friend. Then have the Paladin cover the Blue Mage. Doing this, we observe that the Paladin takes all of the damage, but for some reason Avail does not get cancelled. So, if the Paladin stepped away, Avail would still redirect to the third friend. This does lead to a follow-up question. Does the order matter? For this test, exact same setup, but have the Paladin apply cover first, and then apply Avail afterwards. For our test, the exact same thing happened. The Paladin takes the damage. This does make sense though, since the Paladin is volunteering to take the damage, while the third friend is being volunteered to take the damage. Number 4. Blue Mage's Avail and Paladin's Cover don't ignore the same actions. For example, Bismarck's tornadoes cannot be redirected by cover, but can be redirected by Avail. False. But in the right way. So the falseness here is in regards to Bismarck. To actually prove the general claim true or false would require us to test every single case in the game, which, well, I'm not doing that, it would take too long. However, the claim is that Bismarck's tornadoes will not redirect on cover, meaning someone being covered by the Paladin will take the damage and knock up themselves. But Avail will, meaning that a blue mage walking into the tornado will knock up their meaty shield friend instead. Absolutely hilarious if true. For this test, you will need a Paladin, a blue mage, and a friend. You will also need one Bismarck, although the hard version will suffice. It can be done unsynced as well. Progress through the fight as normal. The tornado will appear alongside the serpents. Once the tornado appears, have the Paladin use cover on the friend, and then have the friend go into the tornado. It is important that the Paladin stays really close to the friend while not getting hit by the tornado themselves, as cover only has a 10 yalm leash. And if you get knocked upwards, that vertical distance might be able to break it. As you can see here, not only do I get knocked up, but at one point I get double punched to rise even higher. For the second test, have the blue mage use Avail on, I suppose, anyone they want. Just make sure that person is close, and then have the blue mage run into the tornado instead. Once again, the observation is that the meaty shield gets knocked up instead. Now, I just want to mention that there is a very high chance that the origin of this claim is that the leash on cover and Avail is extremely short considering the context. It is very possible that the leash simply breaks from distance in the tests people have done. However, in this control test, you can see that it works exactly the same between both. They both work. Number 5. Different jobs generate different amounts of Esprit for dancers. Mostly false. This claim originates from the fact that Dancers' standard and technical finish enables party members to generate Esprit for them. This is only generated from weapon skills and spells, which would suggest, if you stopped reading the tooltip right there, that jobs with a faster GCD would generate more Esprit, and ones with a slower GCD or longer cast times would generate less. However, the tooltip itself states that the chance of triggering this effect varies between jobs. Obviously, the logic here is that faster jobs deal with a lower chance and slower deal with a higher chance to somewhat even it out. For this test, we will use a monk and a black mage representing the two extremes of the fastest and slowest. Approximately anyway. First, for the monk test, the monk will simply be spamming Dragon Kick. It doesn't actually matter what GCD they use as long as they go consistently, as the chance varies between jobs, not actions. At least according to the tooltip. Over about 3 minutes, in this demonstration I gain 140 Esprit. For the second test, we have Black Mage, although I will preface this by saying that Zav said they did not feel very confident in their capacity to play Black Mage, so keep that in mind. Because Black Mages have a large variety in the cast times of their spells, it is somewhat significant for the accuracy of the test that the rotation is played out somewhat normally, making it harder than for Monk. In this demonstration, over around 3 minutes, I generate 100 Esprit. However, mistakes happen, cooldowns that could save time and so on are not being used optimally and so on. This is still interesting information. For the third test, we swap places and I play the Black Mage. And over 3 minutes, Zav generates exactly 140 Esprit. Notably, I have a fast Black Mage build, which might make a difference here. However, what really matters here is that Black Mage and Monk can generate the exact same amount of Esprit over 3 minutes. My guess, based on these observations, is that the probabilities for generating Esprit is designed to be around 50 Esprit per minute, which is not so much that it would actually matter if one job generates only 40 per minute. However, it seems like as long as the job is played well, it generates around the same amount. So now all you dancers can safely place your closed position on whoever does the most damage without having to worry about it reducing your damage as a result. Have you seen or heard about some absolutely ridiculous myths in Final Fantasy XIV that you would like to have explained or demonstrated? I would love to hear about them in the comments. I would also like to thank Zav, Ilana and Puxi for helping with some of the tests in the video. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Endwalker, Warrior's Nascent Flash healed a percentage of the damage done, which means it would have benefited from damage increasing effects. However, as it now does a fixed cure potency, this is no longer the case.